Hello, folks, and welcome to another slightly belated edition of the 13th round. I am, I guess, your host, analyzer of fights, and stirrer of pots, Connor Rebush, and with me is the godfather of BadLeftHook.com, Scott Christ. Scott, how did you enjoy that fantastic night of fights we had last night on HBO?
I like the fights. The Donaire Walters fight I thought lived up to my expectations. I was really excited about that fight. I thought we saw good action in that, kind of a star-making performance for Nicholas Walters. The Triple G fight was a Triple G fight. I don't really argue with getting a Triple G fight every few months. So yeah, overall I was pretty happy with the show, and it was also nice to have HBO actually, showing fights again for the first time in a couple of months.
Yeah, it seems like it's been a while, doesn't it?
Yeah, it was early August, I think. I think the Rios Chavez card, which seems like ancient history now, because that fight sucked so badly.
Did you think it sucked? I didn't think it sucked. I thought it was
disappointing. That fight.
Oh, really? I thought it was fun, but really unsatisfying.
See, I couldn't tolerate that fight. I couldn't, and I like Brandon Rios. It was Chavez's, foul, heavy, messy performance.
Chavez was getting on my fucking nerves.
Yeah, I couldn't take Chavez.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. Well, why don't we first discuss, if we have any particulars to talk about with Donaire versus Walters. This was a fight that I actually thought was a pretty favorable style matchup for Nonito Donaire, and I think it actually did play out that way in the first couple of rounds. But knockdown on a right uppercut in the third round really changed everything. I saw a lot of dissenting opinions, but I was actually inclined to give both of the first round to Donaire. The first one easily could have been a 10-10. It was so close. Second one, I think you and I agreed on Twitter, was unequivocally Donaire's round, despite a Walters flurry at the end that not only hardly landed a single shot out of that flurry, but got him countered with a tremendous left hook from Donaire that likely could have ended the fight had it happened 30 seconds earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But then in the third round, and actually even in the third round, I thought Donaire looked good enough to almost warrant that being a 10-9. I would probably still call it a 10-8 because it was a tremendous knockdown, but Donaire I thought was winning the round pretty easily up until the time he was put on his butt, and so, a deserved 10-8 there for Walters, and then Walters just took over, and I think it kind of speaks to that really being his first fight at this level. I mean, Victor Arcinian is one thing, but Nonito Donaire is like a world-class opponent, a guy who has been to the absolute heights, one of the best champions at these weight classes in a long time. And so I think Walters appeared pretty anxious in those first few rounds. I thought he was really headhunting like crazy. He was way too eager to get into a firefight with a guy who hits as hard as Donaire does, even at featherweight. But after that, he really seemed to kind of settle into the rhythm of the fight and showed the potential that he has, because working off his jab, using subtle defense from the outside, and throwing these right hands over the top, he is a very, very dangerous fighter if you can't hang with him. And he wasn't really a savvy in-fighter. In the pocket, he was getting hit, but he was definitely physical enough to bully Donaire and convince him that it wasn't a good idea to stand toe-to-toe with him.
Yeah. Early on, I thought Walters won the first round. I nicked it to him. It was, so I thought it could have gone either way. Could have been a 10-10. Second round, I did think Nonito won. And like you said, I was going to mention this too. If that left hook had landed in the middle of the round, the fight might have been over in round two, and Nonito Donaire might have won that fight, because that was a tremendous shot, and it really hurt Walters. Yeah, he recovered very well, but that was a great shot. If there had been a chance to follow up, put him down, another clean shot might have pretty much taken him out of the fight. So Walters got a little lucky in that sense, but at the same time, he then adjusted. He didn't, make the same mistakes again to get into so much of a firefight with Donaire, which is, it turned out, that was really the only chance Nonito had, was to catch him with one of those great counter left hooks. And that's been, sort of a building problem. And I don't like to be the guy who goes, well, I've been saying this for years, but me and a lot of other people have been saying for a few years now, even when Nonito was steamrolling guys, over the years, going from flyweight to super bantamweight, when he looked so great all the time. A lot of the time he had a physical advantage in those fights. And a lot of the guys he looked really spectacular against, the first fight with Darchinian, the fight with Fernando Montiel, those guys sort of played into the counter-punching that Donaire excels with. And that's why I agreed going into the fight that Walters had a very good chance to win this fight, which eventually, of course, he did. But Nonito had a nice style matchup. If he was going to look really spectacular at featherweight, I thought this was the type of fighter that it could be. Now, as it turned out, Walters was just a little bit too strong, and Walters also had a great game plan. He adjusted well, and once he started working behind his jab, which ended up dominating the fight, it was all Nicholas Walters. Nonito made that adjustment to try to fight inside, which, again, it turned out to be basically the only thing he could do, and it just didn't work well enough. I thought, it worked a little bit in the fifth round, but it just ended up not being enough. He just wasn't big enough, wasn't strong enough, wasn't able to handle the power. And frankly, and we said it during the week too, I don't know how much Nonito really wants to fight anymore. He's 31, he's not old. And I'm not even saying that it's like, he hasn't been beaten up terribly, but the guy, he's a young father now. He's got a young child. He's very committed to his life outside the ring. He's got other interests. I don't know how much, he's really looking to get in there, and I don't know if he has the same drive that he used to have when he was coming up.
And I think it also bears saying that while 31, 31 might not be that old for somebody welterweight or above, it's
Right.
pretty old for a fighter of Donaire's size. Usually with guys at featherweight, maybe junior lightweight and below, they either have to move up by the end of their career, or more often than not, they're done by the time they hit their late 20s.
Yeah.
I mean, even the best champions at like a minimum weight and light flyweight, all those guys, the greats of the greats, have usually been amazing champions right near the end of their teens and early 20s, and they usually don't last through their 30s the way that guys at welterweight, middleweight, and above do. I mean, heavyweights are crusty old bastards, and minimum weights are really little young kids, and that basically you ride the whole spectrum through all the weight classes between. I don't know. I guess, as you said, it comes down to whether or not Donaire wants to, because I thought he did appear to be more mature as a fighter in this fight. Some of his old issues came back to haunt him after that knockdown, but I thought he looked better than he has in a while. He actually looked like he was really well prepared. He was balanced, and it was really just the same issue I think that's given him trouble against lots of people, which is that he pot shots and doesn't really have the adaptability. Nonito Donaire is spectacularly good at one thing.
Yeah.
Is landing one big counter shot when you overextend yourself. And if you are smart enough to not fall into that, and also, you have a chin because you're likely going to get hit at least once or twice. He's got great timing. Then you can beat him. And I think it's a testament to the fact that Walters is likely a talent that's here to stay at the top of this division for a while because of, as you said, his adaptation. The fact that he was over anxious at the start of that fight. He was going after Donaire. He didn't seem like he could really control his emotions. He got tagged. It seemed to wake him up, and after that, it was a very smart, methodical fight from him. And he did to Donaire what Donaire normally does to other opponents, which is slide back and walk him into a huge shot, and it just absolutely melted Donaire. So I think Donaire, if he can show up like that again, he could probably do well at featherweight. Maybe not against guys like Nicholas Walters, but like you said, it really depends if he wants to keep going.
Yeah, and I'll also say if he can comfortably move down to 122, which I don't know if he can or not, but body-wise, it does look like he could still do that. I think he's a great opponent for guys like Carl Frampton or Scott Quigg, and I'd give him a great shot in those fights. He still has the talent. I mean, what he's always been good at, he is still good at. And there are guys at 122, like Frampton and like Quigg, who seem stylistically, and they're very good fighters, especially Frampton, in my opinion, is a terrific young fighter. But I think stylistically, those guys do present good matchups for Nonito Donaire. Those could be great fights. I agree. It all depends really on what Nonito actually wants to do. If he wants to be in the sport, then that's great. But if he doesn't see, if he doesn't have the desire to keep being the guy that he was even going into this fight, like if he's coming out of this one more discouraged than he was coming into it, then I think that definitely hurts him going forward. And I don't know if there's, and you hate to say, well, I think the guy should maybe hang him up at 31. That's hard to tell anybody to do in any line of work at all. But, if he's got something else that he wants to do, if he'd like to maybe go into commentary or training or whatever, maybe do that.
That's funny you say that. I was just going to make that exact suggestion. I think that Donaire is one of the rare fighters who I would really like to hear in a commentary booth. I think he would make an excellent analyst. He's smart and well spoken. He seems to really understand the nuances of boxing. I think he's got a thinker's mentality when it comes to the sport. So I would, like Paulie Malignaggi, I think that he would really transition well to that world. And then after this fight, we got like one of the most heartwarming post-fight interviews in the world, where both Walters and Donaire were eagerly trying to praise the other more than they could be praised themselves. Both guys showing a lot of humility, and I think friendly post-fight interviews is a theme that kind of carried into the next fight. Of course, Golovkin has never had a post-fight interview that didn't just make you want to give him a hug. He's the most ironic man on earth because he can finish the most brutal shellacking of another, just destroying a human body in front of tens of thousands of bloodthirsty fans, and then call somebody a good boy, and everybody just wants to pat him on the head and hang out with him. So I guess Golovkin had a Golovkin fight. I mean, what can you say? Did Marco Antonio Rubio have any chance going into this matchup?
I didn't think so. Some people seem to talk themselves into, well, Rubio's got 51 knockouts. Rubio's a bigger guy. Yeah, he's a little bit bigger. I don't. Even not making weight, he outweighed him by 8 on the night. He was always going to be a little bigger. He wasn't, massively bigger than Golovkin. And he's got 51 knockouts, but against a lot of guys who can't fight.
Right.
Rubio has been gifted chance after chance after chance. I'm not saying he's not a decent fighter. He is. He's had some good nights. But against guys like Enrique Ornelas or Jose Luis Certuche, other mid-level, scrappy kind of, generally fun to watch but not that talented kind of fighters. I thought in the short amount of time that this fight lasted, you saw everything wrong with Rubio style-wise as far as going against Triple G. Yeah, he could take the shots a little bit, and he took a couple of good ones at the end of the first round, and he did throw back. But if you just look at his defensive stance, he's very straight up. He's so incredibly basic that somebody like Golovkin, who doesn't do a lot of flashy things or anything like that, but has great timing, has great power, seems to know when to attack, seems to know when to kind of lay back and maybe play possum a little bit. I thought he would pick Rubio apart, and the only fight in Rubio's career coming into this that seemed like it might give him a chance was the win over David Lemieux.
Yeah.
And the difference is that, at least at the time, David Lemieux was kind of an overconfident, maybe even borderline arrogant fighter who kind of really thought that his thudding power was just going to get everyone out in 1, 2, 3 rounds. Didn't do that, and he wound up gassing himself, and that was a great performance by Rubio that night, taking nothing away from that. But other than that, the fights that I saw that sort of indicated what might happen and what might more realistically happen was the fight against Kelly Pavlik, where Pavlik wasn't exactly at his best at the time. He'd just come off the loss to Bernard Hopkins, and it just wasn't. Rubio was just totally out of that fight. It was in Youngstown. Pavlik had a small but rowdy crowd totally behind him, and he just completely battered Rubio until the fight was basically mercy killed. Because Rubio was never in that fight at all. I thought that would happen again, but given that Golovkin is sort of, has so much momentum, has so much confidence, and is frankly a better fighter than Pavlik was, I didn't see Rubio lasting long in this. I figured it might go 5 at the most, and we only got 2 out of it.
Yeah, I mean, if you peruse Rubio's record, if you look at his past few years of fights, he's the kind of guy that anytime he's got punching ability, but really it tends to be in a sort of, I can take your punches until you stop throwing them, and then I hit you with more of mine than you can take. It's not like he's a one-shot knockout artist in most cases. Typically, when he's getting an early finish in a fight, it's over a completely outmatched opponent, somebody with less than 10 professional fights on their record, somebody who has a losing record, and when it's somebody with a respectable record like Golovkin's, or a respectable record like Lemieux's, if he does win, it's a late knockout. It's
right. And I did think he was pretty close in the fight with Chavez Jr., but I thought that said a lot more about Chavez than it did about Rubio. I've never been someone who bought into Freddie Roach fixing Chavez, which was the idea for a little while.
Yeah.
Chavez has always been a mediocre fighter. He's always going to be a mediocre fighter. His talents are that he can take a great shot and that he's willing to stand in there and bang. I have nothing against Chavez watching him fight. He's very fun to watch fight, but he's really more of a Rubio level fighter than he is a guy like Golovkin or even the Pavlik that beat Rubio.
I see Chavez as being a matchmaker's dream as a fighter because he's utterly predictable. He's the perfect kind of fighter that you want if you're trying to test a certain aspect of a fighter's game. Like when they matched Canelo versus Angulo, it was pretty clear they were thinking, okay, we want to see how well Canelo can transition from his defense to his offense. We want to see how he can deal with pressure, if he can box and still knock somebody out. That's a good matchup to make to build high-level experience for him. And I think Chavez is the same way. He can give a lot of people a really tough fight if they don't match up with him favorably. But the game plan to beat Chavez Jr. is the same game plan every time you fight him. It never changes. So, yeah, I don't know. Rubio, Golovkin, it was a squash match from the beginning. I don't know. I'm not sure... got a lot of flack, Scott. I got a lot of flack for my write-up before this fight. It also got a lot of views for badlefthook.com, so thank you, folks. But I just want to say I'm not being critical of Golovkin to be critical. I think Golovkin is such a boxing darling in the community. Everybody loves Golovkin. I love Golovkin. He's so damn likable. He knocks everybody out. That's what we want in boxing. How can you not love him? You have to be a Golovkin fan. So when I take a look at Golovkin and I say, I'm kind of worried he's taken shots from guys. He's more and more willing to eat punches, to give punches than he was when he was a really more of an archetypal Eastern European boxer puncher. That's not me criticizing or insulting Golovkin. I don't want to come across as a hater. I want to come across as somebody who's trying to point out something before it becomes an irreversible problem. Because I do think that the Golovkin of 3 or 4 years ago would probably not have eaten those right hands from Rubio in the first round of this fight. And Golovkin's recipe for victory these days seems to be feel you out, invariably take a few punches, realize he can take your punches, and then just walk through them and put you away. Yeah. And that's okay when you're at this level. You can do that. If you're at the top of this heap, but that's why it worries me, because Golovkin doesn't need to do anything other than that when he's fighting the comparatively weak top 10 of the middleweight division. It's all he needs to do. And if people have this idea that if he gets put in a tight spot, Golovkin's going to revert back to the boxing ability he showed in the past. And that's not how it works. Once you learn to ride a bike, you never forget. But you're going to have a really tough time competing in the X Games if you just spend 2 years straight riding around the suburbs. You know what I mean? You have to practice those skills for them to stay sharp. And when you get put under pressure, you fall back on what you know. And now what Golovkin knows is that when he hits people, they go away. And my concern is that when Golovkin faces somebody who is crafty, experienced, also confident enough in their offense to come at him, it's an interesting question. So on that note, I'm interested to know. I'm not going to ask who's next for Golovkin. Basically, Golovkin tells you himself after every single fight who he thinks will be next for him. But of the proposed matchups out there, I think the most likely, or at least the most compelling ones, are Cotto, Canelo, Ward, and Froch. Those are the people that Golovkin want to fight. Funnily enough, they're all people that are not in the middleweight division, unless you consider Cotto a middleweight, which he really
Cotto's kind of a middleweight.
He is the middleweight champion. It's hilarious that he's the middleweight champion, but the man, I mean, what did he weigh in that fight? 154 pounds?
Yeah, he's not a middleweight, and no. I think I didn't even see a lot of the post fight yet, but I think Freddie Roach suggested maybe Golovkin fight for the middleweight title at 154 pounds with Cotto, and it's I get it, but if you don't want to defend the middleweight title, then give up the middleweight title. Yeah, I mean, it's really that simple. If you don't want to fight the guy, and it's not like Golovkin is some huge middleweight either. No. But if you don't want to actually fight at middleweight, then we get it. You won that title. Yay, he puts that on his Hall of Fame plaque. That's fine. But go back to 154 because clearly that's where Cotto belongs. Of the guys out there, Chavez, I don't know what weight he can make. They've talked about him maybe going back to 160. I don't see that happening. If it does, he won't be any good. The last time we saw him at 160 was Martinez, and he looked like shit. I mean, there's really no other way to put it. So,
No, yeah, right.
you know, if he goes up to 168, I think he's got dangerous matchups and very troublesome matchups with Ward or Froch. And there are other guys at 168 that I'd be interested to see him against simply because, you know, they're bigger guys, they hit harder, and we assume they can take the better shot. I mean, we know Froch can take a great shot. We know that Ward can take a pretty good shot, and Ward doesn't take a lot of shots that are clean anyway. The one thing I would worry about with Ward is Ward being rusty, since he's not really fighting anymore. But I think if he stays at 160, Cotto is, you know, a fun matchup. I think Cotto presents some stylistic problems because Cotto's a terrific fighter, and Freddie Roach is very good at planning for fights. So I think that could be interesting, or I think it could look interesting for about 3 rounds, and then Golovkin just kind of walks over a guy who's too small.
I'm at least refreshed to hear you say that Cotto presents an interesting stylistic matchup.
Well, yeah,
absolutely agree.
He's a good fighter. I mean, you know, he knows what he's doing in the ring. He hits hard. He works the body well. You know, with Roach, he does legitimately look kind of refreshed offensively. Miguel is a very, very well-rounded fighter. I think in the end, probably he's just simply too small. And I don't know, unless he can hurt Golovkin really early, I don't know that he can do enough damage to stand up to what Golovkin throws back because, you know, I've seen Miguel hurt pretty badly at welterweight against Margarito and Pacquiao. I mean, I'm not assuming that Miguel Cotto is going to walk through shots from Gennady Golovkin at 160 or 158 or 155 or whatever they might be able to come up with. Canelo, I think, is a terrific fight. If that were to get made sometime next year, obviously it's not first. You know, everyone involved will want to do Cotto against Canelo first because there's so much money in that, and particularly for Cotto, there's so much more money in that for Miguel Cotto at this stage of his career, taking on, you know, another established like superstar level fighter.
Yeah.
Renewing the Puerto Rico-Mexico rivalry. Maybe doing it on Cinco de Mayo or in September. You know, it's a great fight on every level, basically. You know, from business and I think watchability, it would be a great fight.
I think stylistically that stands to be a very entertaining matchup.
I think that's a good fight, and if Canelo were to come out of that and maybe look to move up to 160, I think he's a very interesting fight for Golovkin because he hits. He's not a one-punch guy, but Canelo hits hard enough that you can't just mow through him, and he's got a big frame. I think he'll handle 160 well, and he's a smart boxer. You know, and if you're right that Golovkin sort of has regressed a little bit, even just mentally in his approach to what he's doing, simply because he's used to being able to do this, and if he gets kind of, you know, a challenge from a guy like Canelo, is he really going to start going, okay, well, I should go back to the boxing that I was doing before, which I'm very good at? Or is he just going to keep kind of throwing and maybe walking into counter shots, getting picked off? You know.
And my question is not will Golovkin choose to go back to his boxing? My suspicion is that he won't know how anymore.
Yeah.
It's not a thing that you can just switch back on. When Golovkin was that very tactical, fundamental boxer puncher style, that was a thing that he trained to do. It's not just, you know, fighting is visceral, so we kind of forget these people are fine-tuned machines. It takes a lot of preparation and little adjustments to make these fighters do the correct things. Yeah. And if you don't train those things, they go away. And I think we're seeing evidence not only that he's training them but not using them. I think we're seeing that he's training to do something different. He's gone from being a boxer puncher to being a stalking pressure fighter. That was always something he could do. Yeah. But he used to kind of use his defense to close the gap, and he used to feel things out a lot longer and really get a sense for where your weak points were. Now, I think he has the sense that everybody's weak point is the same. It's their chin, and he's going to put his hands on it. And, you know, ultimately, there are some matchups out there that I think pose trouble for somebody who is used to fighting opponents in that way. And with 18 consecutive knockouts, most of those now, or at least all the recent ones now being under Abel Sanchez, under this current style he's been using, I don't think that he'll be able to go back to that. So for Cotto, Cotto and Canelo both I see as being interesting matchups because both of them can box. Both of them can move and stick long punches and have relatively good defense, and yet both of them share the same trait that Golovkin has, which is that they can also respond to tight spots with punches, meaningful punches. Cotto has a tremendous jab, which you can stand about 6 inches from Cotto's face, and he'll still stick his jab out straight from his shoulder and knock you on your ass. He's got a very powerful left hand in that sense, and his hook has been an increasingly prevalent part of his game once again under Roach, especially the body punches. I see those as being very useful things against Golovkin, whose infighting I think has deteriorated somewhat. And Canelo, I think, is just an all-rounder. He's an excellent fighter as well. He's got, as you said, neither of these guys have the same power as Golovkin. That's obvious. Right. Golovkin could probably knock out a heavyweight. I mean, he's got tremendous punching power, but Canelo, too, has enough power to make somebody respect him and the savvy to throw those punches in close at range to find the openings. So I see both of those as, I'm not making any kind of prediction that Golovkin will lose, but I see both of those as being very challenging fights for the kind of Golovkin that we are now used to seeing.
Yeah.
I see those being very compelling. And until then, I mean, I predict we'll see Canelo Cotto, and then whoever wins that, I expect to see them against Golovkin. Until then, and then until then, since Golovkin loves to stay busy so much, I mean, who's probably up next? I guess people are talking about the winner of Andy Lee versus Korobov. They're talking about Martin Murray. I'd like to see Murray against Golovkin.
Yeah, I'd love to see Murray. And they're talking, I guess one idea right now is he'll return February, probably in Monaco again. So, and that's where Murray's been fighting. He's fighting this coming weekend over there again. He's fighting Domenico Spada, which is, basically a tune-up. If Martin Murray is available, I would love to see that fight.
Yeah.
I don't think Martin Murray will win. I don't even know that he'll do very well. But he's a credible, tough veteran fighter who's, as a stay-busy fight, it beats the hell out of Ishida or Osamanu Adama, which we've seen over there before. So
yeah, and because Murray is so large at this division, I think it gives an interesting idea of how Golovkin would do against somebody like Chavez or Froch, when he does ultimately, if he does ultimately decide to move up in weight, which I think most predict he will have to at some point.
No, I'd like to see it. I mean, I hate saying that guys, well, you should move up because there's no one here. Well, look, sometimes if you're the best in a division, that's just how it is, and there's nobody there. But everyone would like to see Golovkin move up. If he can't get a fight with a Canelo or somebody like that at 160, let's go ahead and move up. Try out, the second tier guys at 168 for a while. I'd like to see him fight Arthur Abraham, partially because I'd like to see him knock out Arthur Abraham. A fight with a guy like George Groves could be really interesting if Groves is ready for that sometime next year.
Groves isn't. Groves actually is a great fight because I don't think he's quite disciplined enough or physically there enough to beat Golovkin, but I think he could probably vilify some of the suspicions I have about Golovkin. He's just like he did against Froch. I mean, just like he did against Froch. He's a smart enough boxer, strategically and tactically, to expose those holes, but just not good enough to do it without getting knocked out at some point later in the fight.
And I wouldn't mind seeing at 168. I wouldn't mind seeing Golovkin against Sakio Bika. And I know a lot of people don't want to see Sakio Bika at all, but that's kind of why I want to see that fight. I want to see how Golovkin deals with a guy who's basically a complete wild card at every second of the fight. You really don't know what he's going to do next. I mean, it's not that he's so uncontrollable, but he can, go fully on offense and get really wild with his punches. He's not afraid to foul the shit out of you if he needs to, or if he just wants to. And he can box a little bit. He's a bigger guy. But at 168, to me, the dream matchup is with Carl Froch right now because I think stylistically that's just an awesome, awesome fight. I think that's just a complete war of a matchup. Yeah. I would love to see that fight. I mean, obviously Andre Ward would be a great fight too, but I would personally prefer to see the Froch fight. And then, look, if he beats Froch, fight Andre Ward, that'd be great too. But
say what you will about Golovkin under Abel Sanchez, or say what I will. I guess I'm the only one who's really proffering any reservations. But we've just now named at least a dozen fighters that we want to see Golovkin see. All of them top fighters. No matter what you have to say about Golovkin, you want to see him fight every good fighter within a reasonable distance of his weight class. You want to see him fight everybody, and I think that says a lot to how entertaining he has become as a boxer. You just want to see Golovkin fight and be tested and challenged.
I mean, if HBO had a date in December, like a December 6 or 20 date for Golovkin, and he could fight Billy Godoy or fight Matthew Macklin again. I don't care. I'll happily tune in to see him fight. Give me a decent co-feature, and I'm fine.
Yeah.
I'll watch every Golovkin card there is.
Yeah, it's hard to turn away. It's there's one more thing I want to bring up before we turn off. Have you ever seen another puncher with natural power who throws punches like Golovkin? Do you notice anything strange about the way he throws his power punches?
Yeah, maybe I mean, and I'm not. This isn't like my area of expertise by any means. If I have one, it's not this. But it's almost as if he doesn't. There's not a whole lot of weight shifted into his punches. I think
Yeah,
I don't know what it is, but
I almost see Golovkin. He looks like somebody who muscles their punches when they throw them. Like they almost look like arm punches. Like his whole back and arm is tensed up. And typically, when I think of somebody who has natural power, like a George Foreman hits you. It looks like you put a 16-pound bowling ball into a tube sock and swung it at somebody's head. It's just this looseness. Like there's no effort. It's the true definition of heavy hands. Whereas Golovkin has this startling rigidity to his punches. Even his jab, it's like there's just absolutely no give to his arm whatsoever. It's like he's the hardest arm puncher of all time. I don't even understand how he gets the power he does in his punches. It's one of those things that, as an analyst, I cannot explain how or why Golovkin hits as hard as he does.
I used to think the same thing about Antonio Margarito, and I'm certainly I'm not throwing accusations out, but that's the one guy. Over the years, I've been like, God, it doesn't even seem like he's hitting that hard, but he's just beating the shit out of guys.
Why are their faces
I thought
exploding?
that during the Cotto fight, like that's when it really kind of hit me. I was like, God, that doesn't even seem like he's hitting that hard, but he's just breaking guys down. And I mean, I don't know if he did anything. I know that he and his team apparently tried to do something before the Mosley fight. That's all that I know for sure.
On that nefarious supposition, I guess we'll end this recap of last night's HBO card. Golovkin, always a guy to tune in to see. I think Donaire still qualifies in that, and now we've got a new must-see fighter on the scene in Nicholas Walters. I mean, overall, it was a really fun night of fights. You can't walk away from that feeling anything other than satisfied, and it inspires you to think of the fun matchups in the future.
Yeah.
So with that, we will leave you. Once again, I was and will continue to be after we hit stop broadcast, Connor Rebush. You can find me on Twitter at BoxingBush. You can find me on Facebook, facebook.com/Connor Rebush MMA, something or other. Scott is at Scott, BLH?
Scott Christ BLH, yeah.
At Scott Christ BLH on Twitter. And, of course, you can follow Bad Left Hook on Twitter. You can find Bad Left Hook on Facebook, too, I think, and badlefthook.com. And with no further ado, follow us on social media, blah, blah, blah. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. What will that be, Scott? What's our next big night of fights?
I think it will be November 8th for the Hopkins-Kovalev fight.
Hopkins-Kovalev. So hopefully we'll have either a cerebral stinker to complain and marvel at if Hopkins wins, or we will have a stunning end to a fantastic career if Kovalev walks away.
On that one, I'm either going to be, really psyched that Kovalev is like the new big breakout star at 175, or I'm going to be throwing shit in the air because I can't figure out why Bernard Hopkins continues to be Bernard Hopkins.
Why is he even still walking?
I have no idea what to make of him. He's otherworldly. He really, the alien nickname fits so well because I just don't understand him. He's nothing I can relate to.
Hopkins spends every training camp just going around ancient Egyptian tombs, reading the inscriptions on the walls to find everlasting life. Nobody knows what his real secret is, but hey, even if his fights aren't fun, you've got to watch him fight. Yeah. Just for the fact that he's such an old man and he's whooping people's asses.
Yeah.
So thank you once again. I was Connor Rebush. This is Scott Christ joining us for this edition of the 13th round, and we'll see you next time. Bye, folks.